Hello, listeners, and welcome to Cobbs Corner. I'm your host, Morgan Cobbs. In today's episode, we're going to do a review of Iron Man 2. This was the second Iron Man film and the third film in the MCU. This film further developed Tony Stark as a character and introduced us to Natasha Romanoff, played by Scarlett Johansson. This film also further developed S.H.I.E.L.D. as an organization. We saw the return of S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Coulson and S.H.I.E.L.D. director Nick Fury. The main antagonists in this film are Justin Hammer of Hammer Technologies, played by Sam Rockwell, and Ivan Vanko, played by Mickey Rourke. Ivan is the son of Anton Vanko, who was a colleague of Howard Stark, Tony Stark's father. Anton Vanko helped Howard create the arc reactor, which is the same device that is keeping Tony alive. Stay tuned. The film starts out picking up right where the first Iron Man left off, with the press conference where Tony tells the world, "I am Iron Man," and Anton Vanko in Russia, who was a colleague of Howard Stark's and co-creator of the arc reactor. As he is dying, he's being taken care of by his son Ivan Vanko, and tells Ivan, "That should be you, and all I can give you is my knowledge." And then Anton Vanko dies, and Ivan Vanko vows revenge on the Stark family and starts building his own version of the Iron Man suit, his own version of the arc reactor. And it's almost a shot-for-shot remake of Tony Stark's building of Mark 1 when he was in the cave in the first Iron Man movie. And we then cut to the title of Iron Man 2, followed by Tony Stark opening up the Stark Expo at Flushing Meadows in Queens, New York, and announcing a collective vision to leave behind a better future, and kind of introducing one of the essential themes of this film, which is legacy and leaving behind a better world for future generations. He then shows a video of his father at the Stark Expo in 1974, and he shows everyone the city of the future, city of tomorrow, and as a formal welcome to the Stark Expo. Yeah, that's the video from 1974. Bringing that into about 2010. The expo is being covered by WHIH, which is the MCU's news source. It's the MCU's version of like CNN. And they show up periodically throughout the films. They're the main news station for Marvel films. After the expo opening, Tony's issued a subpoena. He is to come before the Senate Armed Services Committee for a public court hearing about his use of the Iron Man suit, the Iron Man weapon, and Armed Services, they wish to have him turn it over to the U.S. government, to the American people. And so that's the premises for that hearing. And at this hearing, Rhodey shows up, but not the same actor as the last film, as the first Iron Man. We instead have Don Cheadle is recast as Colonel James Rhodes. There's a little meta joke about it when Rhodey shows up, and it's Don Cheadle. Tony says, "Didn't expect to see you here," to which Rhodey responds, "It's me, I'm here, deal with it." Bit of a meta joke about how they recasted the role of Rhodey. The Don Cheadle for Iron Man 2 and all future MCU films. So Rhodey reads a specific paragraph taken out of context from his preliminary report that he did on Iron Man, saying how Iron Man does not operate within any branch of the U.S. government or the U.S. military, so therefore he's a potential threat to the U.S. government. But he then went on to say that the benefits far outweighed the liabilities, the assets far outweighed the liabilities in having Iron Man remain an independent entity. This theme of government oversight will show up in a future film. I'm not going to say which one, but they're planting seeds for future films. And Justin Hammer, who's the main weapons contractor for the U.S. military, he shows up and he kind of puts in his 2 cents about how Iron Man should turn himself over to the U.S. government. And intelligence photos are released to the public of speculation of attempts to replicate the Iron Man weapon in the Middle East or in North Korea. But then Tony commandeers the screens and shows everyone the failed attempts to replicate the Iron Man suit in Iran and North Korea, even at Hammer Industries, Justin Hammer's company. And seeing a test pilot who got injured. So yeah, Tony's like, there's no grave threat. We're fine. I've successfully privatized world peace. You cannot have my armor, though. You cannot have my property. Mine. So yeah, Tony dismisses any threats, goes home, but then realizes that the palladium core that he has inside of his arc reactor, the arc reactor in his chest, is slowly seeping into his bloodstream. The continued use of the Iron Man suit is worsening his condition. He's running out of both time and options. The same device that's keeping him alive is also killing him. Right up under his nose. And Jarvis, who's the system AI that he has in his house, which stands for Just a Rather Very Intelligent System, has run simulations on all known elements and none serve as a viable replacement. Tony's running out of both time and options. He doesn't tell anybody. Pepper shows up, and he doesn't tell her. He instead makes her the CEO of Stark Industries, and makes her the CEO, and then the notary who shows up to facilitate all the paperwork when Tony actually turns over his company to Pepper. She's introduced as Natalie Rushman, as a notary from the legal department of Stark Industries, but she'll be showing up later on in the film. And then Tony goes to the World Grand Prix in Monaco, where he has a car in the race. Justin Hammer has a car in the race. Roxxon, which is an energy conglomerate in the MCU, has a car in that race as well. But little did they know that Ivan Vanko, who had been given a fake passport and fake papers putting him on the crew at the race in Monaco, that he's a part of the crew, and this fake identity had been given to him by the Ten Rings, the terrorist organization that was mentioned in the first Iron Man film, which we didn't know till years later that was a member of the Ten Rings who handed him those papers. So he's on the crew, and he's got his own version of the arc reactor. He's got his own suit, although they don't say his name in the film. Whiplash, I think, was his villain identity in the comics. And Tony, because he figures, he doesn't have that much time left and he's dying, he decides to actually drive the Stark car in the race. And then Ivan steps onto the track and with his electric whips starts slicing cars in half, and then tries to slice Tony's car in half. Tony survives. They have a battle. Tony gets the Mark IV Iron Man suit, and which is like a suitcase that he has to step into and assemble, and the battle ensues. Vanko's apprehended. He's detained, and he tells Tony that Tony's from a family of thieves and butchers, that he has no idea the amount of lives that the Stark family has ruined, and like all guilty men, he now tries to rewrite his own history, and that if you can make God bleed, people will cease to believe in him. There will be blood in the water. The sharks will come, blade him in the chest. Very painful way to die. So they have a little dialogue. Tony again kind of dismisses him. Tells him, "Where will you be watching the world consume me from?" "Oh, that's right, a jail cell. I'll send you a bar soap." And then he kind of just dips. And when he gets home, he actually does a deep dive, does research on Anton Vanko, and finds out that Ivan's father, Anton Vanko, was a Soviet-era scientist who defected to the United States and helped Howard Stark create the arc reactor. But then Anton Vanko saw the arc reactor as a way of making money. He just wanted to make money off of it. And then when Howard Stark found out, he had Vanko deported back to Siberia. And then his son Ivan Vanko, who was a physicist by trade, he was raised in this environment. He was raised by his father, who had, been deported and been written off by the Stark family, by Stark Industries. And then he became a physicist, and he served 15 years in prison for selling weapons to Pakistan. And for that newspaper clipping, they just used an actual photo of the actor Mickey Rourke, a younger Mickey Rourke, when he had gone to jail. And so now Tony knows what's what on Anton Vanko and Ivan Vanko. But he still, again, figures, Ivan's in jail. There's nothing he can really do now. But then through a coordinated effort by Justin Hammer, he breaks Vanko out of prison and brings him back to Queens, to his shop in Queens, and he provides Vanko with the money and resources to make Iron Man look like an antique, to develop the hammer suits, and he wants to make Iron Man look like an antique. He wants to kind of destroy the legacy of Iron Man, and so the two of them are now working together, unbeknownst to Tony, unbeknownst to Pepper, Rhodey. So, Tony figures, again, at the same time, Tony is dying, and he figures that he doesn't have that much time left, so for his birthday party, he invites a bunch of people into his house, and, he's drinking. This is kind of a, subtle nod to that whole demon in a bottle storyline from the comics, and which is what this movie was supposed to be. They were going to dive deeper into his struggles with alcoholism, but then they decided to take a lighter tone just so they don't end up with like an R rating, or they can keep it, PG-13 and, that sort of thing. And he's got an actual DJ, Goldstein, who shows up as himself in this film. Goldstein, who's a famous DJ who unfortunately died before the movie came out and did not actually get to see himself in the film, but he's got celebrity DJing his birthday party. He's wearing the Iron Man suit. He's just blasting, pretty much breaking his house apart. And then eventually Rhodey shows up to this party, and Rhodey commandeers the Mark II armor, tells Tony, stand down. He tells all the guests, get out. Tells Tony, take that suit off, shut it down. You don't deserve to wear one of those suits. You've been negligent. And so they have a brawl around Tony's house, and Rhodey ends up with the armor, and he flies it over to Edwards Air Force Base, where they have the software analyzed, and they have it armed by Justin Hammer. Justin Hammer, he gives all of his firepower to the War Machine, as he's now referred to. With Air Force pilot Colonel James Rhodes in the suit. And meanwhile, Tony is found by, of course, Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, who we saw in the post-credit scene of the first Iron Man film. He's found by Nick Fury, and they sort of hide out in Randy's Donuts in Inglewood, California. I think it's Inglewood. Famous Randy's Donuts. He says, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to exit the donut. They go inside, and pretty much Nick Fury says, contrary to popular belief, you are not the center of my universe. I got bigger problems than you in the Southwest region to deal with. More on the Southwest region later. And they pretty much put Tony on house arrest and end up giving him a ton of his father's old work, his father's old stuff. And Nick Fury gives him the rundown on how Howard Stark was one of the founding members of S.H.I.E.L.D. and how he worked with Anton Vanko, and Vanko saw it as a means to make money, and how the arc reactor was supposed to be a precursor to a new arms race a new energy race that was gonna dwarf the arms race. It was gonna make the atomic bomb look like a AAA battery. That's what the arc reactor was a stepping stone to. It was unfinished technology. And then as Tony goes through his father's old videos, B-roll footage from the Stark Expo video that he had back in 1974, he finds out that his father had hidden in the original City of Tomorrow the structure of a new element. Structure of a new element. So Tony, what he does is he goes to Pepper Potts' office and kind of apologizes to her for the way he's been acting without actually confessing that he's dying. He takes the City of the Future, the actual physical plans, back to his house. Although he's supposed to be on house arrest, he's not supposed to leave the premises. He's supposed to be being watched by Agent Coulson, who later gets transferred to New Mexico. And he then and then Tony, as he's working in the workshop, he creates a wireframe holographic projection of the 74 Stark Expo, City of the Future, and he then is able to look at the structure of how everything was laid out and sort of rediscover a new element. And he finds that this element is a viable replacement for palladium. And then he goes back into hardware mode, kind of breaking apart his house, and he's and then he has these giant tubes that he's using to synthesize this new metal. He synthesizes it into this triangle that he then puts into his new arc reactor, and he then gets a phone call from Ivan Vanko, who we all thought was dead. Finds out Vanko's alive, and that he's been working with Hammer, and that Hammer's making a presentation at the Stark Expo. So Tony rushes over to the expo and interrupts the presentation, and then Vanko takes over all the suits and starts firing at the attendees and at Tony. He even has lock on the War Machine suit, so Rhodey starts unintentionally firing at Tony. They take the battle outside, and they crash into this Oracle Dome, where through the help of Natasha Romanoff, we now find out that Natalie Rushman from Legal was actually Natasha Romanoff, an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Due to her breaking in to Hammer Industries in Queens and relinquishing control of the drones and of, at least of the War Machine armor back to Rhodey. And two of them, they kind of make up. Tony says, Rhodey says, "I'm sorry," and Tony says, "I'm sorry," and they work together to fight off all of the Hammer drones, and then Ivan Vanko shows up in his drone, in his suit, but this time it's an actual metal suit, and with whips. And then the two of them, they work together to stop Vanko, but then all the suits are rigged to blow. Everything blows up. Tony finds Pepper. They escape to a rooftop. And everybody's safe and sound. The next scene, we see, in the background, you see a S.H.I.E.L.D. They're at a S.H.I.E.L.D. black site, it looks like. And in the background is news footage of the brawl between Hulk and the military at Culver University, which you remember from the previous film, The Incredible Hulk. There was a skirmish between Hulk and the U.S. Army at Culver University in Virginia. That happens around the same time of this film. And there's the Romanoff had done an Avengers Initiative preliminary report. This is the second time that we hear the word Avengers Initiative. Did a preliminary report on Tony and said that he doesn't play well with others. He's plays textbook narcissism, and they recommend Iron Man join the Avengers Initiative. They don't recommend that Tony Stark join. Tony's were not recommended, but Iron Man is. And then Nick Fury explains that at this particular juncture, they only want to use him as a consultant. So he's used as a consultant. And to end off the film, Stark and Rhodey are honored at a public ceremony, and their presenter is none other than Senator Stern, who was the senator who had who had led the court proceedings against him on the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Senator Stern, who had said some, who had said a few four-letter words about Tony on his way out of the courtroom, and now he's got to present medals of honor to not only to Colonel Rhodes but also to Tony Stark. And yeah, Tony kind of ends the film as a team player, not as a solo superhero, but as a member of the team. And now the real reason why everybody sits through these films is for the post-credit scenes. And there's only one post-credit scene in this film, and it is, well, there's only one set of credits. There's usually two sets of credits. This film only has one set of credits, and after the credits, there's a scene where, remember, Coulson got sent to New Mexico. So we see Coulson driving through the desert, and he drives over to this giant crater in the ground, and he says, "Sir, we found it." And the camera pans over to the crater, camera zooms out, and there's a hammer in the ground. That is a nod to our next film, which will be Thor. This film further develops the theme of legacy from the first Iron Man, only now as it applies to Tony Stark telling the world that he's Iron Man. But what does that mean now for him? We know that he's Iron Man and that he has more responsibility to humanity and to society as a freedom fighter, as a hero. But what does, that mean for him? What does he want his legacy to be? And having to deal with the sins of his father, and Ivan Vanko also having to deal with the sins of his father. And Ivan Vanko, his father worked on the arc reactor as well, and him putting together his arc reactor, but he becomes the villain, despite his best efforts. I think he's the first of many MCU villains who have justifiable motives. Ivan Vanko, he followed in his father's footsteps. His father, who was a Soviet scientist who defected to the United States but was then deported, and then that whole environment that Ivan Vanko was raised in, he's a product of that environment, and having to sort of see, in the West, Howard Stark being praised for his inventions and Tony Stark also being praised for his inventions, and then becoming Iron Man and thinking that should be me, and then him sort of waging war on Stark and Stark's legacy, and going after his legacy and his image. And so I think that theme of legacy is very prevalent in this film. And also the theme of, not so much theme, but we get character development for Tony Stark. We get, he's now altered the arc reactor. He has learned to work better with others. He starts to realize he can't save the world on his own. And we are introduced to Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff. We see Happy Hogan, the bodyguard. He shows up again. So return of a lot of old faces, introduction of some new faces. I think this film overall was more of a stepping stone to future MCU films and dropping Easter eggs at future projects that we will see in the coming episodes. And that this film definitely accomplished a lot, with juggling, dropping Easter eggs for future films, and also giving Iron Man character development, and also having an antagonist who, I think Sam Rockwell and Mickey Rourke, they kind of showed up, did their thing as the villains. Although there were a lot of scenes that were cut, a lot of plot lines that were cut, and but in the end, in 2010, we got Iron Man 2. Overall, I think it was a pretty good film. Let me know in the comments where Iron Man 2 ranks for you in your I guess tiers of MCU films. Do you think it's one of the better films? Do you think it's kind of middle of the road? Do you think it's one of the more underrated films? Do you think it's one of the worst films? Like, let me know where it ranks. Let me know in the comments. And our next film will be Thor. This film will introduce Chris Hemsworth as Thor, Tom Hiddleston as Loki, Anthony Hopkins as Odin. It's going to introduce us to the location of Asgard, and we saw Thor's hammer in the post-credit scene. So that will be our next film. Before I wrap up this episode, just wanted to let everyone know this podcast is now available on Anchor, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. And in the coming weeks, we will be available on other platforms as well. And I'd like to officially announce that the uploading schedule, we will be uploading new episodes every Friday at 10 a.m. on wherever you get your podcasts. Every Friday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time, new episodes will be published. If I'm going to miss a week, I will let you guys know in advance. Don't forget to like this episode, comment down below where Iron Man 2 fits in your MCU lineup. Don't forget to share this podcast if you liked it. Tell a friend. Really, really helps the podcast grow. Follow me on Instagram at future_mechanical_engineer. Follow Cobbs Corner Podcast on Instagram at my last name, Cobbs, COBBS _corner _podcast. So that way you know when our episodes are live and when our episodes are uploaded and finished. And don't forget to subscribe, because we will be dropping a new episode every Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. As always, I will talk to all of you in the next episode. Peace.